Thank you so much for having me. Just to piggyback on what Pebble said, is they did, HHRF did fund one of my original research on equine assisted services in veterans, and it was really nice to hear the presentation that they just were talking about some of the measurements, because those are the same measurements that I included as well, the MDI, the PCL5, and also SF36, which was the quality of life, and looking at those over an eight-week, 1-hour session with our veterans, and we found clinically significant changes. The statistical significance, it was so nice hearing from a biostatistician too, so I'm just yay for the biostatistician. I work with a lot of them in public health and epidemiology, so I am surrounded by my biostat fellows, and it's just really, really nice to hear the statistical approach, because I think that language is so critical, that we're using correct language such as efficacy studies, making sure that our assessment tools are reliable and that we've tested that prior to using that, because as we start to layer the subjective with the objective, those are very important parts of the research. And so I'm going to try and stay put. He told me to stay put, and I don't do well staying put. I'd like to move and write and draw and things like that, but I'll try and stay put. So I really think that's a great segue into some of the things that we were doing with this particular study, because we actually are doing the same thing, adding that objective physiological measurements to what we might be seeing and trying to parse out what is it about this interventions that include a horse that are what we call the mechanisms of change. What parts of that environment, whether it's the horse movement, the horse being around it, the barn, what part is actually showing or leading to or encouraging change that we seem to be seeing. And so that's hard to measure because it is very complex. And I do also really appreciate them talking about the complexity of this, and from a researcher's perspective, so difficult to quantify what you're seeing because every intervention is so different. And that is the struggle coming from a research perspective. How do we get enough of this data out there and the research out there to validate that this is can be therapeutic, or is it therapy, and how do we measure those and making sure that we're doing that correctly. But it's difficult because the interventions can look very, very different. So adding those subjective and objective types of measurement tools to our repertoire of how we research is very, very important. So that's kind of where we did with this particular one. And I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I know a little bit about, some things that I know a lot about, because you're going to see my research team was quite extensive, because I had the biomechanic people involved, the engineers were involved, the behavioral specialists were involved. It was quite a team, and I'm representing that team. So I will do my best to answer your questions and hopefully to direct you to the right people, and I can give you the contact information if you want to talk directly to the specific researcher that was part of this study as well. So this study was funded by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. It was quite a large grant that we received. Like the other presentation, it happened during COVID or beginning of COVID, so things were very difficult at first. But I'll talk about the recruitment process and what we have so far. So this is the research team to kind of give you an idea. The PI on it is Dr. Brian Garner, and he is an engineering and actually developed the mechanical horse that we are using in this particular study. And I believe he'll be at the PATH conference with the Miracult, and he's, so Kathy's. That's my understanding too. Yes, so he will be there with that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because that was really fascinating to watch the engineer, computer science person come alongside horse people. It was really fun because he was like, what is this? What are we doing? So it was really fun. I've been working with Brian for a long time. And then I come from a public health, and I've talked to a few people who say, what public health, how did you get into this? And well, we have this thing called One Health, which is the intersection of animal, human, and environment, and that's kind of where I come in. And so understanding not just zoonotic diseases, but understanding that we have this relationship with animals, and that's how my public health is coming into this. Then Dr. Paul Fillmore is our communication disorders and neuroscience background, and he ran the EEG on the kids. And then I have engineering and biomechanics, and then Julie Ivey is my educational psychology, who is the autism specialist and started our autism center for Baylor. And then we had a consultant on the EEG, and then a couple of research assistants as well. So, and then other students that were filtering in the lab and are still working it. So it's quite a team, and to be part of this. So a little bit of the background of the study, why this study. First of all, we know from looking at the literature and what we've gathered at this part, there seems to be some beneficial effects of this intervention that we have with a horse, and we can see that. We're starting to gather that data, it's starting to build. We know that specifically with children with autism, we have seen some good documentation that there's some benefits to interacting with a horse, both physical and social. We've got enough data out there to support that. But again, one of the things that we're lacking is that understanding of what is it about the horse. Is it the movement that helps that child to focus better? Is it the movement that helps them to walk better? Is it the movement that helps to unleash some kind of ability to speak their first words on horseback, which I've heard people talk about? We can see that, but what happened? What part of that brain opened up and that allowed us to do that? Was it the movement? Was it being in the barn? Was it being with another child out there? What was it actually happening? So we need to really isolate that movement. And that's been difficult because we can't take the movement out of the horse. Thus, we can because we made a mechanical horse that takes just the movement. And so Brian, Dr. Gardner, actually developed the mechanical horse. It was based on horse movement. My daughter and I were the first people on that horse with our little electrodes all on us and on the saddle, and then he put us through we called it Spudnuck, but it was all these little lights and cameras, and we ran the horse through that. We did all the motion. He wrote the programming and computerized the whole thing, and then took all that idea to his prototypes, and then they went through several mechanical horse renditions, and they came up with where actually measures or actually mimics the three-dimensional part of the horse or of the movement. And what he found was that we'd had able-bodied individuals going through as well as those that had some disabilities. And what he found was that the movement of the horse the translation of the movement of the horse to the person mimics the same thing as if you have an able-bodied person walking, as far as how the pelvis rotates in a three-dimensional. And he was able to match that up to see that is this really working. So he did it mathematically and through his engineering process. So it's not a core trainer. Some people think, oh, it's a mechanical horse, it's like a core trainer. No, it's not a core trainer. It actually has that same movement. And it has a variable speed. So that way we could capture the best we could a horse. It doesn't take into consideration horses with different stride lengths. So we did an average horse. And what is an average horse? Well, we could debate that for a long time, but we took several. And you have to start someplace, and so that's kind of where we're at. And then I'll come back to show you that in just a second. And so we also, reason for this study is because we realized that children with autism typically have an atypical gait. There's some patterns that you can see from being around. Not all of them have large motor deficiencies, but some have fine motor deficiencies. They have decreased standing balance ability, so these are some common things that we saw in children. Sensorimotor integration difficulties with social skills, as we know from working with children, speech delays, irritability, hyperactivity. These are the known things out there in the literature, and those of you that work with autism could check off many others probably as well. But this is some of the things that we started with looking at our research. So here's the Miracle Colt. It's called Miracle, and that is the simulator. And this is the translation, and what you're seeing there is that the actual, the actual motion and the target horse motion, is in the solid, and then the dotted line is in the Miracle. And what you're seeing is that they start to actually go along with the same balance. And so it's what it's showing there, and he's got the whole three-dimensional. I think you'll have this at PATH as he has it set up, but he actually has all the simulation, and you can see how they actually translate in the pelvic moves. So to confirm that it actually does mimic the horse's movement fairly closely. So we've demonstrated a strong correlation to the real horse movement, and then also he has piloted this, using this in various PT offices, and also with Nancy at clinic at Rock Therapeutic in Georgetown has had one of these and used these. And so we've seen a lot of people that have found that it's very helpful. But we really wanted to know what was going on more so we had to take all of this and put it into a lab situation, which I know removes it from the arena, but again, we're isolating just the movement. So what was our study design? It's a single case. It's still ongoing. We've got our last participant, we think, going through right now. Single case crossover design. We had 2 protocols. And we randomized those to selection to those protocols. And so they were either with the mechanical, we had 2 mechanical horses, one that we just turned off and one that was going to be moving. So we would have the same patterns going on both of them, the same interaction, the same testing, but we would see that child on the horse was not moving. We called it sleepy horse. The sleepy horse versus the wakey horse. And they got to go on they had 5 sessions on the sleepy horse and then 10 sessions on the wakey horse. And you may ask, well, why did we change those doses? Well, as we all know with research, it looks really great on paper, and we can construct this wonderful research design, and then when you roll it out, you find out it doesn't work so well. And so what had happened, we had equal doses, but in the recruitment of trying to get these children here and working with the parents, we were losing very quickly because they just couldn't commit that kind of time, to be honest. And so we're like, we're going to not have anybody if we keep this going. And so we said, let's kind of pivot a little bit. Let's shorten down the sleepy time, the kind of the control part of it. We can use a single case design, which still gives us the child is their own control, if you will, and we can still do a comparison. Not perfect. I know statistically it's not going to be perfect, but it's one of those things we had to pivot in order to gather some kind of data. So this is what where we've gone to, and we've been able to keep the kids coming. The hardest thing has been getting the parents to bring the child they come twice a week, coming twice a week for the amount of time, and they're working with different kids, and so that's been the struggle. We do have the participant inclusion criteria. They had to be high functioning, 6 to 12 years of age, because we needed them to be verbal, and so they could take some cues. They had to be able to follow instructions. You're going to see from the protocol that this was kind of could be a stressful protocol for them. So they had to be able to follow the instructions. They had to walk across the gait analysis so many times and be able to do that without running off. And we were chasing several down hallways, and so this doesn't always work. And so we had to make sure that they could follow those instructions. They had to be ambulatory. So some of the same criteria that I think used also in the arena as well. I know you have some variability in that, but we tried to be fairly consistent with that. So basically, we did several different things. We did the pre-post session assessments, and then we also did between their time on the horse that wasn't moving versus a horse that is moving, called the control and intervention, basically. So we did a gait analysis and balance and EEG reading with open eyes and closed eyes on each session, pre and post. And then between the intervention sessions, like the time that the 10 sessions on the wake horse and then 5 sessions on the control horse, we did gait analysis, balance, EMG, which we looked at the firing of the hamstrings, and EEG as well, and then behavioral assessments. And I'll go through each of these and then tell you what we did, how we did it, and then what we've seen so far. So it's just still calculating a lot of the data. And then also what we've learned that we may or may not work next time. So the protocol, just to kind of give you an idea again, it was, of course, IRB as it would need to be, signed parental permission forms and assent if applicable, which a lot of times that's not with children with autism. Verification of autism disorder, then that was verified by our school psychologist because she can go through and look at all those, make sure. And we also had a video and picture release because we videoed every single session for fidelity so that we could see on average time how long they spend facing forward, facing sideways, facing backwards on the horse. And so all those things were assessed, and so we have all that data as well, and they were able to look at make sure the interventions were run consistently across there. Plus I also had a student who was verifying how many minutes, what they did, what were their activities, and those types of things. Participants were randomly assigned to non-movement or control first, so that we didn't know which one they were going to get. So some of them would go to the control for 5 sections, and then they would go to the movement, then some that would reverse, so that when we do, it's kind of a crossover type design. So when they do that, we can look at, did it make a difference if they were in control first versus in the movement? Does that make a difference? And there are actually some things we're starting to see on that. The intervention sessions were about 20 minutes of ride time. It was longer than that because they had to sit on the horse to start off with and have the helmet on for the EEG and run all that and be quiet and close their eyes, which was very challenging, but we got that. And then they had the activities. And so the riding activities, because people have asked about this, did you have a speech pathologist there, or a speech therapist there? Did you have a PT, OT? No, we did not, because we didn't want the therapy to be involved in this, because we just want to see, does the movement in and of itself do anything without having that? So we're very, very intentional on that. So we did activities that would be normally done out there riding, what I call the riding activities, where you guys talk about they throw a ball or they stretch this way or that way. It's not, I don't have therapy goals. There was not structured that way, but we just ran the same kind of activities. They had a little dart thing they could throw, so we're using both hands. We did some stretching, just some basic things that you would do for riding balance, so that any probably riding instructor would do. This actually, Nancy Krennick kind of helped because she's a riding instructor as well as a researcher, and so she looked at it and said this would be some normal activities that you would have in the arena without actually having a therapist going through that. So that was done purposefully, and so you might see better gains if you actually had a therapist that was involved in using the movement of the horse on top of the therapy goals and very specific therapy interaction. That might actually improve it. But again, we want to see just what was going on with adding the movement part. So assessments were collected, as I mentioned. Many assessments were collected at sessions and then also during those other times. And right now, we only have a subset of the analysis are represented right now because we're still crunching the data. The EEG data is huge. That's not my specialty area, but from what my colleagues tell me, that each child in session can have 230 images that have to be gone through, and it's quite complicated, and we'll talk a little bit about what they've told me so far. So they're going to be a while crunching that data. And it's not perfect data either. It's very difficult. It's got a lot of artifact in it as well. So we have 11 that enrolled. So far, 8 subjects have completed the study to date, and 1 is currently finishing up. We were hoping for much more. Our original aim was, we're going to have 30 kids. And it's been very, very difficult. Recruiting has been extremely difficult. Of course, COVID in and out, was great for a while and then not great. And then you just have so many parents that are I just want how stressed parents are. They want to do this, but they got 3 other kids they have to get to other places. A lot of them are single parenting it, and it's just very, very difficult. So we've just had a really, really hard time. We've recruited everywhere we can think of within a driving distance of Baylor. We do have an incentive, where $150 gift certificate that we can give to them afterwards to help for gas and those types of things. But it's been difficult. So our funders have been wonderful and very reasonable, and so I think we're going to probably settle out at about 9 or 10 at this point. So kind of give you an idea on the treatment control riding sessions. Again, they're about 20 minutes. So they spend so far about 10 minutes facing forward, about 6 to 7 minutes facing sideways, and about 2.5 to 3 minutes facing backwards, depending on them. So when they go backwards on it, they try not to hold on to the handlebar. And a lot of them don't. At first they do a little bit, but then they actually get very used to it. And that was something else we're measuring, and I don't have it on here. We're measuring how fast that because they actually have electrodes markers on them to see how fast that they're syncing with the horse, to see that synchronization. They can be very off at first, and then they start to synchronize very quickly, usually a couple sessions. So that's a different data set. So let's talk about each of these, and I'm going to do the very best I can, knowing that this is not my specialty area, but my biomechanical people gave me some notes to take as well. So the equipment, I'm going to show you a picture. So the equipment is this Strideway, and Nancy Krennick has actually used the Strideway down at her facility as well. So the system uses a dense floor, mounted array of local cells, shaped of runway. It measures the pressure of the walking. I'm going to show you a picture of that. The protocol is they have to do 10 clean passes, pre-ride and post-ride. On that, MCHES stands for the mechanical horse when it's moving, so when you see that. Steady state, they do that also on both of them, the one that moves and doesn't move. So they have to have a steady state achieved, and then when they video capture, so we've got that all set up and they walk through. We have all sorts of games to get them to walk straight on the mat. Sometimes we have a little ball we hold out there, just like, please come get the ball, and not to run and all those things, but we got them quite a few. So that's why they had to follow instructions, and some of them did really, really well. And then the system automatically detects strikes and passes. All this is recorded into all the computers, and it calculates the stride speed and the length of their steps. And it's interesting because if you work with the kids, you start to see the changes that start to occur. There's a very distinct walk. I've noticed several of them, and then you start to see them actually plant that foot down differently after a while, which is kind of fun to see. And of course, we can capture this because it's not just looking subjectively, but objectively at what they are doing. So that's what it looks like. It's a platform, and they have to ride there. And we had to line it with a line, because they would wander off, so we actually striped it. So it's a follow the line as you go across, and that worked well, so they did the best they could. But you can see where we've got these pressure. So it shows the pressure, of course, the cooler and the hotter, just like you would expect. Where are they putting that? I've often thought that all of us should have our gait analyzed, because we probably figure out where we're stepping a little bit odd on one foot. I'm thinking that would be really, really good to kind of. But then you have to do it so many times that it's not the Hawthorne effect, that because you're being watched, that you're, okay, I'm going to walk straight now. I'm going to make sure I'm even, because I don't want to have this really weird foot pattern. Probably should do this on all of our horses too as well. I'm sure they have something like, I know they have sort of for lameness.
Yeah, they do. It's a little trickier.
Yeah. They probably don't know that, they could walk on the little pad. That would be helpful. And then we also did this for standing, so they had to actually do, there's a plate here, I'll show you, but they actually stand feet together, tandem, and then they would stand like this with their arms out and have to stay balanced. And we tried to change which foot they had forward if they would. Sometimes they don't. So you'll see that we had trials before and after foot tandem, FT's foot tandem, and then, or foot together and then tandem side by side. So that's the little pressure pad. We also had to put little foot markers on there so that they would look for the feet, stand with the feet, because they do wiggle a lot. So we have to be, all sorts of games, stand as a tree, don't move, oh my gosh, you can do it, and we counted out 20, and some kids like to count well, some kids wanted to count backwards, which stressed all of our students because they had to count backwards. So they're like, I haven't done that in a while. But some, whatever works to hold them together. And so we would do that. So what they found, and then again, they've just crunched one of the students on the gate, or one of the kids. Well, biomechanical people said that they've only given me one right now because they didn't like the way some of the analysis was the way the program was working, and they wanted to actually change some of not changing the results by any means, but changing the way the data is being analyzed to make sure they're getting the true picture. So they told me they weren't going to release the other stuff to me yet. But what we do say, what they are seeing, even though they haven't quantified all of it, is that they're seeing that over time. This one is the step width. So the step width was starting to go down. Step width as in, they feet out like this. They were actually walking more of a together as they're walking. So that was going down over time between sessions. And then back up. And then this one here shows that the speed actually was increasing as well. So it basically what's starting to happen is their gait is becoming a smoother gait process instead of being an awkward kind of on the toe, push off to the side. And we could see that happening over time. So we were starting to see some changes there, and they're going to be running, like I said, the rest of them. So we see some gait changes. The balance was actually interesting because the balance showed quite a bit of changes. So they did a few more subjects in the balance. They found that 3 out of 4 of the subjects had really showed good change, improvement, 11% decrease in the sway, going back and forth, when they were riding the mechanical horse, the horse that was moving versus the horse that was not moving. So that they were seeing some of that. The stationary horse was less effective. And so if we look at the sway speed, again, that's just back and forth. We want to keep them very consistently straight. They notice a few things that are changing. One of the things that we see here, and going back to the p-values, I know p-values are. I was glad also to hear Biostation talk about p-values. That You can make anything statistically significant if you have enough people in the pool. I mean, you can push anything to statistical significance. Does it mean anything? That's the question. So, but anyway, they did run this. They found that the biggest change here that we saw was in that tandem change, and that's where they have the one in front of the other. And so they saw that this is the decrease in at least 3 of them. One did not, but out of the 3, they seem to see quite a change in that of those 3. So it'll be interesting when we add the other 5 to this picture. Does that hold? Does it make it, do we start to see anything in the feet together? But we are noticing that this is the M stands for the horse that's moving versus the S is for the horse that's not moving, the controls. So we're noticing a decrease in the sway when they've been on the mechanical horse that had the movement for those sessions. So the other thing they did at between, they did not do this every single session just because it takes a lot of time to do it, and found that it worked better to do it between the interventions, is they did the Emg Electrodes, and they put them on the hamstring. They don't do the prongs that go into the muscle. That would not work well with the student. So luckily we got the electrodes on. They're just little stickies. They're little stickies that go on there, and we got them on those. And so they had to do Superman pose, one leg out and those types of things. And so we were looking for also whether those hamstrings were firing and how much they fire. When you have trouble with balance and your core is not strength, your legs are firing all the time. They're peaking because they're like, whoa. But the more stable you get, the less that peaks. And so that's the whole idea behind that. And so again, we just have one of them that they calculated at this point, but they found that you can see the pre-post that it drops significantly on both sides very, very quickly. So we're seeing that the kids that were riding the horse, or the one child that was riding, we're seeing quite a drop. And so they were very excited about this to see how this is going to show up in the other ones as well. So this is with the Superman pose that we had for them. And then this was the lumbar testing that they were doing, the tandem balance. And so we saw the same thing. You see quite a drop from pre to post, which is what you want to see, that their balance was better. And that seemed to show up also in the foot placement. So again, looking at a couple of different things, other measurements, they seem to make sense that we're seeing some of the same types of things. So the balance and the stride seems, the mechanical parts of that seem to be being influenced somewhat by riding the horse movement, or having the horse movement. The EEG is a little bit interesting. This is, it's probably hard to see right here, but here's the child. And he actually has a helmet on, and this helmet is very similar to a riding helmet, although it has they have little bumps on them. And that was the biggest challenge, of course. When we brought the kids in, we would do a meet and greet, because we don't know if the child is going to be able to make it in the study. So the first thing we do is show them the horse. We show them the horse and say, look at this fun thing you get to ride, and then we have to see, will you put the helmet on and let us adjust it? Because it has to be adjusted as all those little things. And some of them, as you can imagine, did not do well. Some of them did. We actually had one that we had to call it, she wanted it pink, and she wanted a certain name on it. So we actually came up with whatever we had to do to get those helmets on and to hold them. And some of them did pretty well, and they did. And that was one of the things is, can they wear this? Can they do it? And they actually can. And because some people said, you're never going to get any of those kids to wear these helmets. And we did. We got them to hold them, and they did a pretty good job. And they got to a point where they would be very quiet. Some of them would have difficulty in closing their eyes. So sometimes we couldn't get the eyes closed one, but we could at least get some of the data. So they were to wear, it's a wearable sensing, and then we have this is a computer screen that actually shows all the brain waves that are going along, and that was sometimes beneficial and sometimes not, because once they figure it out, if they turn their head a certain way, it goes like that, and you're like, no. So mark that down. So I'm not sure that was, we might have to come up with something different, but some of them really liked it. So they would have these sessions, and that's Dr. Fillmore right there, and his assistant would be monitoring that before and after. So this is, I'm going to explain this the best that I can explain it. I will give you Dr. Fillmore's name, and you can talk to him tomorrow. So right now, this is one of the people, one of the kids that we looked at. So what he tells me, first of all, is that, of course, these are standardized scores to what the normal brain patterns would be. The red means there's a higher, that's further from normal. So it's more activation. What he tells me is that you really want them green is a color you would love to see more in the different wave patterns, and these are the different wave patterns. So these are across the session, same kid. So this is kind of how it started, and this is how they ended. And so what you saw was there was a movement towards, seemed to be more normal brain pattern or more of the standard brain pattern as the intervention went along. He tells me that this is a tremendous amount of data that has to be crunched through, and there is a lot of artifact in EEG, in which I'll talk a little bit at the end about. I'm talking to a new colleague we've got that is doing some work with the DoD on a strip that actually goes in fighter pilots' helmets that might actually be better working than EEG, so I'm excited about that. So that might be a good feasibility study, maybe something really good for HHRF. Future time, I got to talk to him a little more. He's just come on board. So the other thing we noticed that he gave me some data to show you. These are actually 8 of the kids, and so what you're seeing here is that the red is the treatment or the moving horse, and the blue is the control horse. And so what you want is really a lot more up this forward. You want this up. You want them higher, which means they're moving closer to the normal pattern. And so we started to see from all of the kids across there that we're seeing a movement. What is showing up, though, at this point, and it's not clear, and we're going to do more analysis on that, is that while they are, it doesn't seem to they seem to do it, whether than the control first or the movement of the horse first, they're having a positive reaction. So we're not, what you would like to see, if we could say with the data, is we'd like to see that they weren't having any positive reaction when they were on the non-moving horse and only positive reaction on the moving horse. So the question that we are, as we start to crunch the data, is this an anomaly? Is it because it's a new intervention and then over time things seem to smooth out on its own, whether the horse is moving or not? Does the movement have anything to do with it? So they've got some work to do on getting when all the data comes in. So on this one, this is a coherence. This is another measurement, and same kind of thing. He saw, he saw more of them. He actually saw more of a going for a positive direction, which means it's moving more towards normal. So this one was actually a little bit more of a positive. 3 out of the 8 participants showed significant improvement. So looking at the different types of analysis will give us a different picture. So we're seeing some, as we talk about, some trends that seem to be interesting at this point with not all the data in and analyzed. And it could be at the end we don't see what we thought we'd see, and it may be the measurement may not be very good, may not work with it well, or it may just not be changing for that. So we'll have to look at all those types of things. So I said, I need some takeaways. I said, tell me some takeaways that I can live. Well, he said that the participant showed significant normalization to the Z-scores on the one that we had. Sometimes it's present in both treatment and control, so we don't know why. It seems to be, they're going the right direction, which is great, but doesn't seem to be a difference. Informal observations suggest these improvements tend to be present during the first half of the study, regardless of whether they start with a treatment or condition. Of the metrics that have been analyzed so far, none have demonstrated consistent normalization during treatment phase only for all individuals. So we need to get all 8 or 9 peak stick kids in there and then get all of the data analyzed to see if and we'll see what happens. And again, also, because there's a lot of artifact in the EEG, I've talked to a couple of people that are familiar more with EEGs, and that's going to be, it may not be the best way to measure this, and so we'll take a look at that. Behavioral assessments, we did several. You'll probably recognize this. Some of you that work with this recognize these assessments. The higher values indicate improvement. And what we really saw at this point is there's just not a lot of difference in the behaviors coming from what the parents are reporting at this point. I know that in other research that we've done, and other research that I've been involved in with autism in the children, with live sessions with horses, we've seen some good changes. We see that in the trend. Right now in the laboratory setting, with just the movement of the horse, we're not seeing huge. Although I always do my research, I always use a mixed method approach. I love the quantitative, but I also love the qualitative. So I always have an exit survey I do with a parent or with the veterans and with my studies, because it gives me some indication about maybe what we're seeing in the numbers, what's the why behind the numbers. So I asked the parents feedback, and I'm still gathering some from the 2 latest ones. And so I said, what have you noticed? Has the teacher said anything? And we didn't have the teachers doing it because part of the time these kids were not in school. They were outside of school because of COVID. But one of the things we started getting some feedback is that the one child, she's talking more. The teachers have noticed some small changes in communication, and she's more organized from participating. Seems to be able to stop irritating behaviors better able to handle physical space, and is communicating better. This is all coming from different parents. For each one's from a different child. Her ability to focus has not changed, but she's now anticipating things and is forward thinking, which was really important for that parent. His balance has improved. He is not tripping over things as much. He is more vocal and able to tell me what he needs. He seems to understand consequences better, less impulsive, thinking twice before reacting. He wants to have friends now. Another one was she is more willing to participate in other things. No real difference in ability to concentrate. Stairs and swinging are still challenges for this child. So the parents are seeing some differences that doesn't seem to be being picked up in the parent forms that they're filling out. These are just observations. You know, you can say, well, is it the parent wanting to find something different? Is it truly finding something different? So we take that for what it is and kind of learn from that. And then I always ask myself, okay, if this is what is being seen by the parent or the teacher, are we measuring the right thing? Are the instruments we're using really helping us answer those questions? And that's a question that we have, because we've gotten some feedback on those assessments. You know, are they the best ones? They're long. And some of the parents said, you know, this is a lot of work to keep filling these out. Does it really show anything? Does it show what we need? And this is where I have to rely on my colleague, this educational psychologist, so she can say, is there other instruments that might be better? And some of you probably know that Robin Gabriel's, she's got a second large study with NIH, and I talked to her the other day, some time back, and she's actually doing heart rate variability with hers, and our new faculty members crunching the data for her on that one. But they use some of the same instruments as well at different time periods. So she's got a very large study that they're working through, and have added cortisol actually to it as well for the children with autism, which has been interesting because I've also had some reviewers say that you can't get cortisol testing done in children with autism, but apparently you can. So, so I think you can. So in conclusion, just a couple of things. Early results indicate improvement in several outcomes that I think is something to look at. From the early data, I think we're going to see more in the biomechanical part. So that's kind of interesting. The gait, the balance, the core, the synchronization to the movement. That seems to be where there seems to be some brain activation normalization. Again, EEG is not conclusive by any stretch of the imagination at this point. Not all outcomes are displayed. Improvements and additional analysis will need to continue with this. So we're going to continue to look at this data. It'll take a while to crunch it. We've got the grant actually ends over this next year. We're going to try and finish up the participants so that we can just start crunching the numbers and getting some of the data out there. So I know I have a little bit of time for questions. Yes.
So this kind of be a bit of an odd question, but if you go back to the brain scans, with that activity going on, the blue ones, before they go to bright green, what? Because I know that one in the middle is all blue. What on earth does that mean?
Excellent question that I have no answer for. Anybody know how to read that? He just kept telling me that if it's moving, the blue actually is moving away. It's moving but the different direction from what I understand. So he's told me that the green is where you want to be for more normalized. So, okay.
Yeah, no, I'm not, but those, if I can read that.
It's a different wave.
Alpha, so right at the top.
Alpha, yeah.
So
this is alpha.
Those are measuring different waveforms.
Right.
So the blue is a different waveform that's being activated. So beta waves and alpha waves are your primary waves, and then one, and I don't recall which, but one is related to cognition, and the other one is related more to movement. So my guess would be alpha is more cognition, and this would be what my guess is. But Google it.
we may have someone in the audience that's knows, can read EEGs too, might build,
Been in the long distance brain cases. Good machines are 90 to 95% accurate, so just don't assume they're always 100% accurate.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much that differentiates your analysis, but just so
Yeah.
you know. But my question was, do you, based on what you're learning now, are you envisioning doing another study with different kids?
we would like to, what I would like to do.
Based on what you learn about this one?
Right. I think there's a couple things. I'm waiting for all of the EEG stuff to be processed to decide if this is even a good measurement, to be honest. I'd like to go back to my other colleague that's working with G-force effects on the brain with the pilots in his work, and he's working on it's a strip that, from what he tells me, that goes into the helmet that it functions more like a functional MRI type of a device. He's working on that. It's a DOD grant that he's got, and he's been working on it for some time. I'm going to circle back with him because I want to see if he's interested in maybe changing how we're monitoring the brain. So I'm not sure on this part whether I want to go forward. I'm waiting to see what we find out. If there's so much artifact at the end that we're not getting a good picture, we might get something very clearly that gives us an idea in another direction. So this was a very costly study, just to kind of give everybody an idea. This grant was $450,000 to run this because we've been running for several. We've got to pay all these. We've got to pay the research. We've got to pay to do it. So this is the kind of money it takes when you start to have multiple people involved for long periods of time. So
It's one tool in doing an evaluation.
yeah.
You know, the clinic, I mean, somebody that can, knows and observes the behaviors, that's probably still the most significant thing. This is maybe one tool to figure out why it's happening, but it's not the exclusive.
No, it's not. And there might be some other ways. I'm really interested in the biomechanical part of that because I think that's easy. And I'd like to see some of this translated to the arena. That would be my next. That was my hope in doing this is, okay, this is what happened in the laboratory. This is what we saw, some changes. Can we take any of these things? And we can. The stride right, those kinds of things are fairly easy to move to a session. So then I would like to take it, okay, so we found this in the mechanical horse, so let's take the mechanical horse and then let's do a real horse and to see now, are we seeing any differences in there? What is the added piece of having a live animal going through space? Because that's a different sensation. Even though you have the three-dimensional movement of the pelvis and you're doing all of that and you're getting the balance, you're still not moving through space. So there's something about that part as well. So how do we, can we do that next? That's where I'd like to go. The way that, I know it's a portable, but I don't know how portable that is going to be, the EEG part of that, to put it on them while they're riding. And of course, there's a problem with the helmet because it's not get a different helmet. I can't put two helmets on. That's why I was interested in what my colleague's doing with what goes inside of a helmet. So I don't know. That's a really good question. But I'd like to take this to an arena and see. Mm-hmm.
And two quick follow-up questions. One is the simulator hard or soft? Like what is the...
Soft. It has a padding on it. And yeah, it has a padding on it. We haven't put let me go back. So that's a soft pad.
Is it just on the top or does it extend around?
No, it doesn't extend around. And they're actually good. You thought it would bother them on their legs, but it doesn't.
So the reason I ask is because we have a full galloping simulator that we use with the jockeys. Mm-hmm. And the movement replicates what the horse's movement is. But then when the jockeys ride it and we're doing motion capture on their lower limbs move more because it's not soft-sided on the low part. So even though the saddle is replicative of what's happening in the live, and they all complain in that situation about how they can't grip into the simulator. So it's just something I'm curious about.
Yeah.
If you have larger riders or longer-legged riders in the future of replicating that movement. And then the other question I had was, you said video capture relative to like the gait analysis and when they're actually on the simulator. Do you know, are you doing motion capture with the little reflective?
We are on, yes. So, well, on the video capture and the walking across the pad, they're just videoing their stride.
Okay.
So there's a speed indicator on that as well as where they're pressing on the pad. And on this, when they sit on the horse, there actually is, there's a sensor, and the room is actually set up with cameras. And so we're capturing not only what's going on in the session, but also those the electrodes. And so we can see how their movement is with the horse's movement. And that's why they're seeing the synchronization between the, because when they first get on there, they're kind of like this, and then they start to synchronize with it.
So is it a wearable sensor? or
Yeah.
Okay,
It's a wearable sensor that we stick it on there.
got it.
They're like little tiny eyes. But I can show you, yeah.
You could take that to the field.
Oh, yeah, we actually, and those were some of the sensors we used in the field. Everything could really go to the field well. The EEG is the one that I'm worried about, that one would be.
My question is more in the area of, unlocking. So with the movement with the horses, how that actually affects the participants themselves. So I heard about the parental feedback, but I was wondering, was there another layer of questioning for the participants themselves?
Yeah, well, we didn't have them fill out a form, but the parents would tell me they were sad when it stopped. They wanted to keep coming. But
From an observation standpoint, did you find that they were more open to communicating, more verbal?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. So they became, and part of that was too probably getting used to who we are. I mean, you think about coming in a new place, that's huge for children with autism, getting them, but then we always put them with the same grad students so that they would have, this is your point of contact the whole time, and we tried to keep that very consistent as best as possible. And some of them some got too chatty. I mean, a couple that were already verbal became even more verbal, and we had lots of stories on the back of the horse. We talked about a lot of places and a lot of things, but that kept them active on there so they would stay on the horse, because that was the biggest thing, is will they stay on for the 20 minutes. And so, yes, they became verbal. I mean, I didn't see any huge change, but those that were verbal were already more so. And the parents tell us they didn't want to stop. They were really sad when it was over. And then a couple parents want to go on and to a regular therapeutic riding facility, so we would refer them on. And the biggest obstacle there is cost for those parents, though. They're like, I can't afford that, and my insurance won't pick it up. And a lot of these moms, I mean, we talked about that, the accessibility, and that's one of the issues.
My question is, you talked about taking it into the arena. Have you looked at or talked about, could the movement being separated from the horse won't show that the movement without the horse doesn't make the difference? And if it does, do we need the horse? Those are like ethical questions that come to my mind.
Yeah, well, and that's what, I did a study that was actually published before this one, that was a crossover study between the mechanical horse and the real horse. We had 4 kids with autism, and they're randomly selected to be in 7 weeks of ride the horse and 7 weeks riding the mechanical horse at the barn. So they had the same environment. And then they had 3 weeks of nothing over the holiday, and then we reversed it. And so we saw no change, and I used a couple of different measurements. We didn't have all of the biomechanical assessments. We used the BOT, which was done by an OT, and there were some problems with that one. But there was no difference between the sessions, whether they were riding the horse versus they were riding the mechanical horse that was moving. There was no difference in change. And so we saw improvement. It was more trend, because you only have 4 kids. You're not going to have anything that's going to push hard for statistical significance. But there were some trends and improvements in their physical ability and in the assessments, the behavioral assessments. The interesting thing that came out of that one came from parents, and we had 4 kids, 3 out of the 4. And I don't know, maybe you guys can help on this one. They had bedwetting issues. They stopped having bedwetting issues when they rode the horse and the mechanical horse, but during the washout period, they went back to bedwetting. I have no idea. I mean, that was just like one of those things. It's like 3 out of the 4 kids, and that's what they said. They said, well, they stopped bedwetting when they were riding. We had some, and then they started bedwetting again during that holiday time. And then they stopped bedwetting again when they were riding again. So I don't know. I mean, we didn't measure that. And I started digging into the research going, well, that's an interesting that we're not measuring. So some of those things came up. But we found that the difference between the mechanical part, what we were measuring, didn't seem to be that different between the horse and the other. It's not that we're trying to replace the horse. It's just trying to figure out what part of that horse is going to help what part of the child. And, and some kids they can't get to the horses, or they don't have the money to. So this is a portable that can go into PT offices and OT offices and and at other places. So I know people get worried that we're trying to replace the horse, and I think that there's the added benefit of that social. And I saw the added benefit, to be honest, when we had the crossover trial. I mean, the little girl that was riding the mechanical horse, when she got on her other horse, she's riding along, she reaches down and she hugs the neck. I mean, you can't do that on the mechanical horse. And they preferred the horse. If you asked them, would you prefer to ride this versus that? I want the horse. So you've got that incentive too. I mean, therapy is only as good as if somebody attends. I mean, if they're not going to attend the therapy sessions, I don't care how great your therapy is. So that motivator, that live horse, we know adds a piece to that. So it's not to replace it, but it's to try and understand what part of that horse is important for what part of the intervention.
Thank you, Beth. Appreciate it.